Franchosis. Good evening. Welcome to Political Cipher with Quandra Gaines. Today, we're going to have a wide range of panelists, but today we have Mr. Gaskins and Miss Ellis with us, and hopefully we will be having Mr. Haney and Mr. Elliott joining us for this discussion. Today, we're going to talk about youth involvement in the political season. Political setting for the elections. Why are they important? What value do they have? And what do we need to do to get them at the polls in November? So the first question is, how impactful is the young vote in the governor's race, the Senate race, the House race, the Comptroller's race, Baltimore City Board of Education race, and then the delegate and Senate race? How impactful are those young people's votes?
Okay, good evening. You going to go first, Lisa?
Go ahead. I yield to the gentleman in the
black. Good evening, both of you, and it's a pleasure to be on the show. And that's a great question. It's a long one. Let's start at the top. How important are they in politics? Period, and especially at the gubernatorial race, and we've just experienced it through the primary, and we saw a multitude of young folk who were involved in the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of energy, tremendous amount of energy. Unfortunately, in my opinion, it was kind of misdirected. Everybody has the right to choose their own candidate.
Mm-hmm.
But in this particular case, a multitude of individuals were misled by a very seasoned politician.
Mm-hmm.
And when I refer to a very seasoned politician, I'm referring to Peter Francho, who sold them the moon and delivered nothing. And some of the young candidates, it's a learning experience for them.
Mm-hmm.
They'll learn that if they had focused their attention on their race and not so much being a pawn
Mm-hmm.
for gubernatorial candidates, they might have done better in their race.
Mm-hmm.
But it was an experience. The danger is after you back a candidate and your candidate loses, and I'll stay on the gubernatorial race. What do you do? Because there's got to be a transition now.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remain a very important piece? How do you become relevant with the next candidate? Because you've lost the entire campaign season working for the wrong candidate. Now you have to transition to a new person for at least 4 years of dealing with it and remain relevant, unless you just are not in tune with that candidate's views and ideology. Then you remain diligent and you stay out and you fight for what you believe in.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think in this particular case, the winning candidate, Wes Moore, is the kind of candidate you can say, I really don't like him and I'm going to work with him and I identify all these things that I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
So I will never support him. I don't think he's that kind of candidate. And secondly, I want to say this, is that history making in the state of Maryland, I think at this particular stage of the game, you have a vibrant young individual who is now has an opportunity to become a governor. So while I'm fighting for youth and the young to be in positions such as the school board, delegates, senators, I'm also fighting for the most powerful position in the state and the gubernatorial race. And it's going to take a very strong team of individuals. And guess what? In this particular race, the youth have the energy, but do they stay home? Or do they connect? How do they connect? Those are all important questions. But the problem that you're dealing with is that the race is on ends on November the 8th. And how do you tie in and become involved in that particular process in such a short period of time? So those are the things that, I think that I would like to see a discussion tonight to talk a little bit about those things. And I will share further opinions.
Good evening, Mr. Haney. How are you? Great to join us today. We thought we lost you.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, I was in the middle of a charter school discernment group. We're trying to plan for a charter school here in Baltimore, but and so I was initially just making sure everything was good so I could switch right over. But it was really compelling to hear Mr. Gaskins, and good to see everyone, Lisa. Good to see everyone.
Good to see you.
And yeah, so whenever you're ready for me, because what Mr. Gaskins said was compelling.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily agreeable, but that's the reason we're on here with the varying opinions.
Absolutely.
That is true.
Absolutely.
All right, Miss Ellis.
I still work with a lot of young people, and looking at why Peter was able to pull them in, because he had on his Black agenda things that appealed to them. And then if we're going to energize that demographic, then we really need to continue to focus on making sure that the issues that's relevant to the youth, millennials, are equally relevant to us as we move forward. Housing is a major issue. How do they move into home ownership with the inflation that we're experiencing right now? They're more likely to be homeless instead of homeowners with the current rate of a single bedroom house. The rate of college and tuition and tuition forgiveness was a big part of the Black agenda for Peter. And that was a major thing for them. How do they reduce debt? And how do they buy into a system that's relevant to their bottom line, reducing their debt, by acquiring a home, and then job security? All of those items were some of the things that was addressed in Peter's Black agenda. But Wes Moore speaks deeply about it, but I don't think in a single voice that is being heard loud enough. And if we're going to energize them to get to the polls, energize them to continue to be engaged in politics, then we need to continue to have that diversity at the table and the conversation, and it being a line item for them to actually go after and pursue.
All right. Welcome, Mr. Elliott. Glad you could join us. Okay, Mr. Haney.
Hey, well, first of all, it's always good to have conversations like this, and listening to Lisa talking about Peter Franchot, who really wasn't the leading candidate, because when Rashawn Baker came out in September of 2021, he actually was ahead of everyone, Peter and everyone. And so, I remember Mr. Gaskins in previous conversations talking about a trust issue, I believe. And Mr. Gaskins, feel free to jump in if I'm misinterpreting what you said months or a year ago in your initial support of Peter and his decision to name a lieutenant governor without the input of strategic Black people like yourself, and you left his camp to go to the Westmore camps, right? So we all go through discernment. We all find out things about candidates that make us look at other things, right? So then you have this party politics to what Mr. Gaskins was saying regarding your candidate loss. Although your candidate lost, so you're a Democrat. So should it move you to the Democratic backing of the candidate? Why? Let's ask Darrell Barnes, who threw all his eggs in the basket with Peter Franchot, right? Versus listening, as you did, Mr. Gaskins, when you left Peter's camp. I believe you said that you left his camp and went to Westmore, found and discovered things that were more with West of value to where you were. And you had others of us listening, right? But when you deal with party politics, do you have to say where you go, or you go with the candidate of the party, and that's the natural transition. Well, if you're a Republican now, that may be of issue, particularly as you have a fractured Republican Party in the state that refuses to back its candidate formally because of certain positions he has against the what you call the leader of that party, the governor, right? But the natural transition to me would be to what Mr. Gaskins says: if your candidate did not win, would be to fall in line to the party, and that's either the beauty or the ugly of party politics, right? That's the natural transition. You
Okay.
talked about young people, right? You talked about young. I heard Lisa say that young people aligned to Peter because he was speaking, and maybe because he was speaking early. He was speaking before everyone else. West didn't come into the race until substantial time beyond Peter, right? So Peter was able to gain a bandwagon of support. But you have to look at Peter's politics over the course of 18 years and how he fractured relationships that were not supportive of him. And he fractured Mr. Gaskins' relationship. I'm not speaking for Mr. Gaskins. And you can talk about relationships around the state, the Democratic Party, that he fractured that more so cost him the race than his.
I totally agree with you. I was on his team originally before leaving his team equally, with Joe. Discovery is discovery. And as an activist, when you learn something, you have to basically act on what you learned as an integrity thing. So I agree with you. The burden of speaking up and revealing. If we want change, we can't continue to know something and then just say, well, you know what, I started with this, so let me follow through. If we want real change, then we have to back those that has the integrity to bring that about. And that's why I walked away from Peter's campaign.
Absolutely. And to your point about the young people, so the young people, and we have to get out there and speak with them, talk with them, because they're not motivating them to vote with no substance of that quantifies what it is that value equates to them is not relevant. And so we sell them a bill of goods that we don't deliver on. And then every 4 years or 2 years, we ask them to vote, right? And then they've gotten smarter, right? They don't want to talk necessarily Black History Month. They want to understand Black history. But if you talk to a lot of Blacks, Generation Zs and Ys, they don't like, Black Lives Matter because they've killed the police have killed a Black person. They're going to go and let out. But some of what we're concerned about from a Black Lives Matter, bringing up Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and causing discomfort in their age group among the demographics of all people they're associated with, they don't seem to be into that anymore. They want peace and harmony unless, hey, they just killed a Black guy for no reason. Let's go protest. But to bring up reparations, things of that nature, I don't know if we talk to them in depth enough to understand that what their values are in alignment with our values are as baby boomers or millenniums, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a disconnect, I believe, politically. And the hope of a Wes Moore is that the foundation of his special interests will allow him some wins. What do wins look like in our community that make our young people feel as though it's not a bag of goods sold to them with no substance?
Welcome, Richard. How are you?
Hey, Richard.
Good evening.
Good evening.
One of the reasons I brought up the housing issue, that Richard wrote an article that was featuring what was that? The town of Laurel, Richard?
And it was Laurel last week, and then tomorrow one will be out about Bladensburg. Same exact practice, same group, everything. Should be dropping in Washington Informer tomorrow.
And what he's writing about, I'm going to yield to Richard to give a detailed discussion about it, but we're talking about housing, the ability to rent, the ability to save and become a homeowner, the ability to have your voice at the table, and who's going to initiate legislation and policy that can help change that. Richard, could you shed a little more light on the article that you wrote? I'm doing a really broad brush, but it was a really good article. And this is the level of intelligence that our young people are bringing to the table that I'm concerned about equally. I mean, to me, it's one and the same. Being a baby boomer versus Richard's age group, he's younger than my children. And yet we still have the same issue that we're talking about today that we were discussing 50 years ago. Richard, I yield to you.
All right. So this article, let me turn my lighting up. Okay, that's better. So in the town of Laurel, there's a group, Schweb Partners. Actually, I'll give you more background to go before that. During the pandemic, one of the biggest commodities that's been bought up by national big finance groups has been housing, single family homes, as well as apartment units, permanent rental housing. In Laurel, there was a apartment complex called Westgate, at least 50 residents. The group that bought them, their building called Schweb Partners, was refusing to do maintenance upgrades, was raising the rents substantially, was not addressing security concerns. And just from a most basic standpoint of me from legislation, not addressing people's maintenance concerns is like violates the Housing Rights Act. You are trying to convince people to move and violating their safety by doing this. If you are an owner company and you're not doing this when you own all the units, that violates a lot of different things. On top of that, there was not the rents were going up. For some people, they were being doubled, going up well beyond their expected ability to pay. One of the major rental groups we have in Prince George's County are seniors who are on fixed income, several of whom were in that Laurel apartment complex. So they were able to get a compromise through the city council because there was additional American Rescue Plan money and then a small increase in rents to make up for it, because even for the small landlords, the cost of housing, the cost of living has gone up. A marginal increase could be understood, but doubling, increasing by 75%, 50% is out of the picture. And that wasn't the only case. There was also another apartment complex there where it got sold to an individual. Again, the city council was able to make a compromise. And in the town of Bladensburg, exact same practice. Schweb Partners, a New Jersey-based finance group, they come in, they buy housing, they raise the rent, they don't address security, they don't address maintenance, they make it where the residents are, in my opinion, are given such living conditions they don't want to renew the lease, basically pushing people out under duress. And under the current housing circumstances, if you have bad housing credit because they say you didn't pay your rent, that can prevent you from being able to sign a lease, or that can increase the amount of money you have to put as your down deposit, or increase the reporting standards for when you have to do your application. This is a problem that's really, really bad in Prince George's because we do not have localized affordable housing standards. Whenever you hear people talking about affordable housing in Prince George's County, in DC, or even in Northern Virginia, we are on a sort of aggregated index where people who are in Southeast DC who've been displaced were displaced because of the formula is set across all of our metropolitan areas income and not your zip code and not your block. So people are getting housing stipends or housing tax credits that make like $55,000 to $65,000 in DC. I'm not going to say I disagree with doing that, but at the same time, people who have a fixed income of less than $20,000 are getting less than nothing, or having their services reduced. In Prince George's County, we're seeing sort of the rippling of that. And in the story, Councilmember Jocelyn Rout of Bladensburg, she outright says we need a formula to determine what rent control would even be. We don't really have a rent control even discussion in the county. Only place I know of that has rent control in Maryland where it's formalized is Tacoma Park.
Well, Maryland is no rent control, doesn't have any legislation or protection for renters, period. And to look at the laws as across the board, Charles County equally have Cushman and Wakefield management companies that was just awarded contracts in Baltimore, and literally they're like a nightmare to renters across the state of Maryland. They're increasing rents has doubled to triple the amounts, and there's no laws that actually protects individual or control it, or help to control the rental rates in the state, Prince George's, Charles County, and the surrounding metropolitan area.
Yeah. So to transition to the governor discussion, I think the two of the main tests that Governor Wes is going to win. I'm not even going to have a debate on that. Wes is going to win easy. That Wes is going to have for his administration is one, who are you picking for your Board of Elections chairs? People like Armstead Jones should be gone and replaced by people who have a dedicated interest in counting the votes properly and expanding access to the ballot. And at the very least, counting everybody that votes and not giving people the wrong ballots. And then giving horrible, nonsensical, crazy excuses. And then the second one is housing. Baltimore City, majority renter city. That on top of the issues that we already discussed regarding the rents and the maintenance issues, we haven't even gone into that in rent court. The landlords win over 99% of cases. There is no public defender, as I know of, for rent court. And then tenants also don't know if before the sheriff evicts you, you can pay them the money and they won't evict you.
And you can contest it right there with the sheriff and go right to the court, and the judge will review over everything and make a decision.
So when we're looking at the energies and what young people bring to the table, is energies like Richard's, and there's tons of others that are engaged that have just won the election. I'm looking forward to this next season because you do have a diverse group in terms of age, and we have the opportunity to bring that voice to bring about change. When you constantly re-elect or have the same people at the table, are we really initiating change or looking for something to really happen? I think we're at a turning point now that for the first time, the state would look like the elected officials would look like the state, and instead of being all white males that are selling us a bag of hope and not delivering on their promises.
Okay, so there were two questions that you guys went right over without me even putting it out there. But what do the youth voters want? What do the young voters want? What do they need to show up at the polls in November? Mr. Elliott, since you are you're representing our young voters.
Okay, so to be perfectly honest and frank, let me take what Lisa said and break it into two groups. There is a extremely large number of very young, 35 and under Black elected officials, your Martin Mitchells, your Crystal Oriatas, your Ed Burrows. There's a lot of them. I don't even have to go down the list. So there's a lot of very, very motivated, educated, intelligent, capable, young Black folks entering politics or who've already been in, etc. I'm going to count us as a completely separate group from just the Black mainstream of just youngsters who, for the most part, are not engaged, don't talk about politics, don't feel represented by politics. And just to be frank, I had to advertise to them for like 2 years running a campaign. I went to high school with some of these people. I went to college with some of these people. I have gotten jobs, whether in a campaign space or in the private sector. And you have to give people concrete results. For one thing, I think that would really help Wes Moore to turn his, I'd say probably 14% win into a 19% win. Hire more Black local people. I don't know many people. And I mean, like youngsters, whether it be for the door knocking, whether it be to sign wave, whatever, when you help people get that job that shows them, okay, not only can I vote, not only can I bother my elected official and tell them how I feel about something, but my elected official needs me for something. It really does a lot. For the people who I've helped get jobs in campaigns or in private sector or whatever, those are some of the people who come back to me the most often to ask how I feel about different things. So job is obviously, let's say at the top of that pyramid for something that's really great to provide for people. Obviously not possible for everything, but a better network of information for why is everybody not automatically notified by the Maryland Democratic Party about what Joe Biden's about to do? Joe Biden, by virtue of the student loan cancellation project, is doing more for me than Obama did in his 4 years from a material policy standpoint, not a cultural, but just the dollars in my pocket standpoint. If the Maryland Democratic Party in Westmore really targeted that so that we can get as many of the people who qualify to apply, as many of the people who think I'm only getting 10 grand, now you're getting 20 grand, know that they should be getting that, and all of that information, because people legitimately don't know of their public programs that could directly be benefiting them right now, tomorrow, yesterday. And that is something where even still with email network and with text messaging, the gap still widely exists between the elected officials and the young people, many of whom, have a college email that they could get from the state to try and message. I'm going to mute so I can start eating my chicken before it gets cold, but I'm still listening.
Okay. All right, Mr. Gaskins.
All right, let me follow up on that. I'll go back to you, Mr. Haney. I'll clarify a few things on Peter Franchot so that you know why I left. You were probably about 60% correct. The reason why I was with Peter was because we worked as a team, myself, Lisa, and an individual by the name of Reverend Chet Howard, when Peter decided he was going to run for comptroller. And so he hired us as a consultant, political consultant, consultants to take him there. And at the time he hired us, he was doing 9%. And we took him from 9% to a win of between 41 to 43%, 43%, I think, during the race. But it was a lot of things that we put in place for Peter to win. First, he came to us and he had this lily white flyer and material, and he was trying to sell that to the black community. And I said, Peter, put that stuff back in the trash can over there, dump it in there because you can't use it. You have to focus your strategy on trying to get the votes now, because the two people at the time was the county exec from Anne Arundel County, and also the comptroller Cipher from Baltimore City. They had a base. They had a very, very strong base. That's why they were winning. I was at a meeting at the time for Cipher, and Cipher, they made a state Cipher didn't even show up in Prince George County, but they indicated their strategy was to turn the campaign over in Prince George County to me and another individual, Wayne Clark, and we were going to work and get it done. And I said, okay, what's your budget? We have no budget. I said, is Schaefer going to come to the community? And they said, he's too old. So you guys are going to have to bring the vote to the table. I said, okay. Of course, you want me to give you you want me to buy into your plan to continue to be the comptroller, or should I find another person who we can mold and make a change? Obviously, we got together. We said we'd do just that. We would buy into Peter. Now, over Peter's course of delivering to the community, he did a few things, but he did nothing that was exceptional. Individuals often ask me when they want to determine who a candidate was, well, what did he do for you, Joe? He did absolutely nothing for me. I didn't ask him to do anything for me. I don't ask every candidate. I asked him to do a few things for a few people in terms of giving them not a reprieve or a reduction of penalties on the income tax. But beyond that, he didn't aggressively go out and to do anything. But there's a loyalty that you normally have with a person, and you maintain that loyalty with them until there's a better person who shows up and shows you that he's the better candidate. So when we started the process with Peter, that's what we were doing. We knew him as a candidate, and we thought we could trust him to do that. But when he moved into his campaign uh, modus of operations, myself, Lisa, and two other people were on his top individuals he went for advice. And the two was one was the chairman of his campaign, the other was his chief of staff, and myself and Lisa. So now comes the real test on who you are. Okay, so the first thing was we need a black agenda. Okay, so Joe, can you write the black agenda? Can you formulate that, put it together? So between myself and Manny, we structured his black agenda for him, uh, in which he really didn't use on the. He always referred to you go to my website to read my black agenda. So you knew that really he didn't put the black agenda in place, but he was smart enough to actually formulate and to structure it. Now, after that, we moved into another mode, and the mode was to put people on the ground to make things happen. Okay, who were the people? There were no people. There was Lisa, who was taking them across the state of Maryland to all of the 8 counties, all of them, and aggressively bringing people on, convincing the young people to join. She did her job too well. So when it came down to where Peter had to make a decision that went outside of the scope of what we originally agreed upon and bring in an influx of new people, in my opinion, and that's what made my decision, he was going back to doing the same thing that the old politicians were doing before. So at that particular point in time, my organization, Lisa's organization, the Maryland Business Clergy, held a meeting of the pastors, business people in the county. We interviewed Peter at the time. Most of them were already supporting Peter and they were comfortable with Peter. They had never met a Westmore. I tried to convince them to meet Westmore, and everybody thought that Westmore had no chance whatsoever. So why should we meet him? However, we didn't split with them. We just moved our agenda in a different direction. So we moved with a meeting with Wes, and when we met him, we were pleasantly surprised that he was a total different person. And he was a person that we thought, much like Peter, when he had those low numbers, that we could bring him, we could get him to a win. It was not difficult to get him to a win because he had the personality, he had the type, and the crowd that he was running with, we could get him there. And so I left the campaign after there was a, I would say, important decision that he made. But during the entire time that he was making the decision, he never told me personally. He constantly lied to me about the lieutenant governor's position. He said he would never appoint a lieutenant governor unless he got the consensus from the group. That didn't happen. And Lisa was still working with him on the inside. And after the decision had been made on the inside, he didn't bother to even call me to say that I have selected uh, Monique as my candidate. Nothing against Monique. Monique went to Howard University. I went there. But the fact that he would tell me after there's a press release that morning that's in the Post and in all the papers that his candidate for lieutenant governor was a person that I made a statement in our meeting that was not the best candidate for that position, and there were underlying reasons, and that we could probably have gotten a better candidate to win. And as the election showed, I was totally correct. He also made a decision to bring on other individuals who were in the community who were warmed over individuals, people who you deem to be important, like the Bruce Barrianas of the world. He brought Major Reddick and the control. He brought a ton of other people. He brought Darrell Barnes on as well. all of those individuals, which changed the entire complexion. And when I'm complexion, I'm referring to a color. I'm referring to the structure, the mindset, the direction that I believe that structure needed to have. He reversed it. He took it down the same trail that the Mike Millers of the world was doing to the community. Same thing, with a grand old guy walking in there, Bruce Barriana, walking into the room and controlling all of the black folk. So that's just not. Never in my lifetime will I be in a situation like that. So I left and I started immediately with the campaign to elect West Baltimore, and I've been there ever since. And I since that time, during that time, after I left, I started to convince key components of the community to divest themselves. The component that I could not, that Lisa did so well of selling them franchise who would not break from that, were individuals that a lot of them lost the election based on the fact that they were supporting Peter in the race. They put their entire careers out there for him and they lost. That's what's so devastating about the entire process here. But at the end of the day, they're young. We won some in the race, and we others got educated by the process. So for that particular purpose, I think the political process is a process that's not exact science. It's a mix of young folk, older folks, political ideology, and I've moved in my lifetime with supporting Republican candidates, Democratic candidates. One of my best candidates I ever supported was Ehrlich for governor, one of the best. He was responsive. He did what he needed to do. And if he ran again, I'd vote for him again. But mine is based on just that. Who is the best? Who's going to be the best candidate? Can you reach the candidate? Is he really going to reach out to the community? Is he going to make a difference? Or is he just going to sell you a song and dance? So for that particular purpose, that's the entire story on how that relationship with Francho ended up uh, actually metabolizing. But I will say this, and which we talked about last week, Amy, was that I would see who the power brokers are. And now I think we begin to see who the power brokers are, because I don't know whether you know it or not, Darrell Bonds resigned from the Black Caucus today.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's just a small component of what this political process is going to start showing the results of decisions made by individuals along the way. And it's a normal fallout whenever you have a campaign, a new person wins, is not wins, but is now the candidate for the Democratic Party. They start to restructure themselves, and we'll see that continue to roll out. I hope I answered the question. I did not answer the question.
We can't hear you.
Huh?
No, I'm talking to Quandra. I see her mouth moving, but I can't hear.
I'll just say that. I'll just say this, Quandra, is that the youth need, the question is, what do the youth want? The second thing is, what do youth need to show up at the polls? What why should they? Why should they put the same time and energy they put into the primary? I've been probably to about 10 or 15 events since the primary, including the Democratic Party's event in Howard County about a week ago. I see nobody. All of the energy, the ideology, all of it. All I see is elected officials. I see none of the individuals who ran in that race out at those particular polls. I don't see the young people. I don't see them with uh, with the force and the magnitude that they showed early. I don't, and they have to. Politics is energy, and I'm not too sure that happens in the state of Maryland. I remember when there were movements that were large and there were the need to be in a political position that we knew that if we did not win with one candidate, we came together, we won with another candidate. I don't know whether ideology works anymore, but I do know this is that in order for, and I think uh, the making a statement that I know that West will win is a false statement. I don't know that West will win. I'm a strong, probably strongest supporter of anybody on this presentation here. I saw that 2 elections back. I saw a strong movement with Anthony Brown. I saw him lose, and Ben Jealous. I saw him lose. You got to remember that the Democratic Party is not made up of all African American people. If all African American people vote for him, and all Caucasian and other people voted for the other candidate, West wouldn't have a chance in hell of winning. That's not the reality of who the state of Maryland is. Now, how do you know he's going to win? When you go behind those curtains and you pull those levers, it's not going to be known until November the 8th, and maybe not November the 8th, maybe a week or two later, who the real candidate is. But nobody, if they're a supporter of Wes Moore, can sit on the sideline and say that this man is going to win. It will only happen at that same energy that you had during the primary is shifted and re-energizes what was done in July. Now, just move away.
Okay, Mr. Elliott, you want to give your comment?
Just for the most part, because our election was really drawn out, a lot of people are just tired. I'm not going to just say that a lot of the young people, whether they ran for Central Committee or like myself that ran for delegate or whatever, election period was really drawn out for where it should have ended in early June, or excuse me, in late June, having it end in mid-July, that hellish week-long election period where it was probably averaging about 93 degrees and it rained really bad, that really washed a lot of people. Plus, I think that for a lot of people, there aren't competitive races. I'm not going to say that the governor's race is not competitive. That'd be false. But for the down ballot races, the only ones in Prince George's that are contested at all are 2 Board of Education races, if my memory serves me right. And of those 2, I don't really think either of those are competitive, in fact, because 2 of the people have a huge amount of have a huge amount of institutional backing, when basically the governor and all the statewide races are the only ones this late in the game that matter. Like, it's really easy to be invested in the delegate race locally. Doesn't matter who wins or loses, it's going to affect my area in particular. So staying involved in the delegate race up until it ends, very, very easy, county council, whatever. But for the governor race or the comptroller, even if I am super, super invested in my area, I spent probably, I'd say, the better part of 10 months doing basically nothing but canvassing, about the most canvassing you can do without like dying or not having any money at all. And it didn't have a grand impact on voter turnout in this district. Add in also vote by mail, where basically anybody that wants to vote and is already registered, mind you, and is already registered now, has about a 40-day period where you can vote. I know back in like 1994, when Irvin Reed ran Wayne Curry's campaign, election day was a day. Literally, you had 1 day to go vote. Before vote by mail, you still would have had the early vote period and election day. Let's call that 6 days total. Now, including vote by mail, you have 40 whole days from when you should get your ballot if you signed up for it to when you can sign up for it, where that's so much period of time that it becomes a lot harder during the general election to convince people that that's what they should be doing. I'm not going to say that Wes has the win in the bag for sure. For other people, that's my opinion. I think Dan is just so wild. It'd be really wild for him to win. It's not about Wes. It's really about Dan in that case. But like you said before, in 2014, when I was an undergrad, people said the same thing about Brown, and Brown ended up narrowly winning. I just throw in that the vote by mail is such a big changer for the process that it makes the general election and voter turnout less of a like an elected or an organizationally involved process beyond us telling people to request them. But I do agree with you. It is contested, and I think it's going to be a win, but I'm not going to say that like as gospel or for people to not get involved.
Right.
Or for people to not get involved.
All right, Miss Ellis.
You know, the vote by mail is easier, but I still link the energy level to what really matters. When we examine President Obama's energy level, why or how he was able to energize young people and kept them energized for two terms. It was more than just him saying, this is important to you, get out to vote. He spoke to what mattered: education, their cost of living, economics, their ability to get jobs or go into business for themselves, and then supporting that. When you look at procurement in the state of Maryland, for African Americans, the numbers have gone down under Hogan's administration. And when we're talking about system candidates or individuals that are controlling that, the Bruce Barianos and individuals are at that level, Major Riddick and all, you're having the same people that are driving. So for me, when I look at my daughters and individuals that are in Richard's age group, asking them, why, and trying to energize them, they say the same people at the table. Why should we? That it's not going to matter. Where's the purpose? How could we believe that there's going to be a change? And that's brought about Peter. Peter, with his Black agenda, was able to actually say or make promises to that demographic that, we're going to bring you to the table, and this is a change that will happen. What I love about Wes is that he's not just making promises, he's actually done it, and he's still doing it. That he has a track record of putting his energy where his promises are. So I'm hoping that energy level drives home a win instead of the great divide that we've seen under Ben Jealous and Anthony Brown. We do know that the Democratic Party in Maryland has been split for forever. You have your white Democrats and your Black Democrats and Hispanics that all have their own personal agenda. And it's just a constant fight. So when you have the same people at the table making the same decision or backing a candidate, the fear factors become like, why should I believe you? And believability is what drives home that vote. So until we can actually put our money, energies, as a business owner, I've been affected and impacted. I still don't have a medical marijuana license. And the problem with that is we were sold that Black people would be at the table. Yet that didn't happen. And we fought to get additional licenses. And yet we still sent Cheryl Glenn to jail instead of bringing any justice to equalizing and making that an equality industry. So young folks are looking at that. They're looking at what we're experiencing and saying, why should we believe you? And until we're at the table to help bring about that change, it is what it is.
Okay, so
let me add one point real quick. Back to the energy point, I think is actually really, really poignant for this, particularly relevant to Obama. I will always bring this up whenever people are talking about young people and voting. For as grand and important, unique as Obama is for Black culture, Black excellence, I'm not ever going to dispute that. That's just facts. especially growing up in the shadow of the Capitol. There is at the exact same time, especially among younger Black folks, incredible disappointment. I already told y'all Joe Biden with the student debt cancellation as an individual act of policy probably did more or is going to do more for me than any individual policy act Obama did. That's just the facts. There is still, to this very day, a wide gap in the perception of Obama as a policy, like actual legislative leader, between older Black folk and younger Black folk. And that disappointment, I think, is one of the key points. You all both brought up the energy of the Obama campaign, which is what propelled him to 2 victories. And I think for a lot of younger people, many of whom I've spoken with in the past, said that was the only time they really ever voted. A lot of them held or hold the opinion of, for all of that energy invested, what was the long-term return in policy?
Good question. Mr. Haney.
Hey, well, I apologize. I'm in Florida at my Florida home. Had to fly down here yesterday to get it ready. And so the power surge just hit because it's pretty ugly down here. And so I'm on another device. So I apologize. But, before I left, I was listening to Richard and Mr. Gaskins talking about, particularly Mr. Gaskins' comment to what Richard said about West is going to win, West is going to win. And Mr. Gaskins inferring the closet or the silent vote, the closet vote that we don't know what's going to happen when they go behind the polls, And so it's interesting, the dynamic of politics in Maryland, and can we get our young people out by, and Richard indicated that, can we get them out of a chicken box of Popeye's chicken? So if I gave Richard a real good chicken dinner, I don't know what kind of chicken you eating, Richard? Popeyes?
Fry it, dye it, put it in sauce, I'll eat it.
Did you cook it yourself?
Nah, my grandma's just a nice lady.
Good, man. That's fantastic. At least you got some good chicken and not Popeyes. So, and so the correlation there is between how cheaply we're going to sell ourselves. We're going to get us a chicken box from Lexington Market, or, off of Route 1 in Prince George's County, or the $10,000. Or no, Richard said $20,000. You know what I'm saying? And are we going to buy and sell our young people out for the price of $10? Because at the end of the day, y'all initially started talking about generational wealth and land and rent control, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what is it really going to take to get our young people re-engaged? Are we just trying to appease them, or we're really trying to educate them? I heard Mr. Gaskins talk about Peter's candidate, Monique, or Jay Walker's wife, or whatever it is, and maybe alleviated the issues they had down in Annapolis, but they all went to Howard. But can we really get our HBCUs involved and give our young people, to incite them to go to the polls, a free education as some form of reparations? Can we really put in term limits statewide so that they have an opportunity? Richard ran his tail off. Richard said he was tired. The sun was very hot. You know what I'm saying? He went a longer month, which meant more money and more expense, right? So it was more geared towards the incumbent. Unless you were in a position like a Mr. Moore that had a consortia of people and special interests and was able to get Oprah on to raise money for him. So it's not geared towards our young people. So why should they be vested if they don't really have a stake in it? Why should our young people vote if we really don't give them incentive or reason to, because we're making commitments and promise to them? Maybe it's not fair housing. Maybe it's buying a house. Maybe it's not a $10,000 or $20,000 stipend, because that's nothing, right? To offset their educational costs. Maybe it's saying that there's 5 HBCUs, maybe 6 or 7 in the state. Pick one. If you have a grade point average above a 2.3 or 2.5, you can go for free for 4 years. The 5th year, if you take 5, you got to pay for yourself. Now that's all of a sudden the motivation if I have a platform and I've figured out the math to do so. You've got a Republican candidate that says he's looking at foregoing state tax like Florida did. and he's looking at the billions of dollars of surplus. So why can't we do something to really motivate our young people? Other than that, Mr. Moore has to do a yeoman's job, in my estimation, between now and November 8th to get the vote out, to make sure he should win. There's no doubt he should win. He's got my support since October, November of last year when I saw him down at that crab feast they do in Maryland, and we had a conversation. You know what I'm saying?
Mecca.
But if we don't help him get the vote out, which is a conversation we had on this platform 2 weeks ago, and how we can really begin to do something that is significant off of this show, we said, let's see if we can't help get the vote out. Then there's an outside chance. Because, see, Dan Cox is going to go to Mar-a-Lago on October 17th, come back with $500,000, maybe $1 million of Donald Trump's money. I don't know if you all had a chance to watch him on my podcast this past Sunday, but he went down. He's going to go down there, bring back that money. Then he's going to come back, and he will have had an epiphany of what's necessary to get the crossover and the vote. Because he was at Morgan State yesterday. He's not afraid to walk into black communities and black neighborhoods. He's proved that. And black people are listening to him. You know, particularly when you talk about gender-neutral bathrooms, you know what I'm saying? And some of the other things that we as conservative Christian people tend to be uncomfortable with, right? Mm-hmm. They're listening to him. You know, what they don't like about him is the fact that there's association between him and Trump and January 6th. And he's got to get beyond that. If he doesn't, Wes won't even have to worry about it. But people are listening to him. But Wes has got to get the vote out, and he's got to entice young people with specificity relative to education and generational wealth, or home ownership, not rent, home ownership, and not being able or not having to have a humongous educational bill, because we can do it. We can pay for a 4-year education at a state-run institution. Most of them are federally or state funded anyway, significantly. Just have them like a public school, you know? But we got to do something to motivate our young people to get involved in the process. Term limits, statewide, and an educational system that allows them not to accumulate debt or be motivated to go to either a trade or a 4-year institution. Mm-hmm. We got to do that.
Okay, Lisa?
You know, I was a beneficiary of a program that government program that paid for my education. And I had a job, secured a job for 5 years with the federal government. It is no reason that we cannot look at programs like that, bring them back to not only help with debt, but to motivate individuals to go to the polls and to participate and to get engaged. Our young folks are smarter, and with them being smarter, you know, their expectations of deliverance is great. You can't just promise something and then just blow smoke up their behinds. And I think, you know, they're basically, I'm tired of hearing it. That's some of the attractions that I believe the challenge of how do we motivate them, and communicating that and marketing that and networking to get them out to do that. We have to show that here is the pathway to home ownership. But the reason I keep referring back to renters, because you have more renters than you have homeowners. And that's a larger voter base. And if you discard them, then you're discarding the ability to increase voter outcome as in overhauling the problem. So we have to continue to focus on relevant matters: rent, home ownership, college tuition, education, energy. You know, these are the things that they're looking at and I'm looking at, that it's going to secure our future. So all in all, I'm agreeing with Richard as well as the conversation as a whole, but to take our conversation and to move it into action to help West to drive home that win is still the challenge that we're having right now.
Okay. So the question I have is, Westmore, are you listening to all of the um, suggestions, viewpoints that are actually being put out here right now? And Mr. Gaskins, and because you are on the Westmore campaign, how do you think he would respond to these suggestions, these comments, and would he put them into action?
Well, I have the time that I've known him and the things that he's put on the table. I would say, yeah, he would respond overwhelmingly to do this. He's made statements, um, basically sharing his platform. He's got a
Mhm.
broad platform that basically, I mean, it's the all encompassing to leave no one behind. But which is kind of generic comment, but it focuses on the individuals who were left behind. And I think that's the most inspiring pieces that I've seen coming from him that would suggest that the things that we've talked about tonight are things that he would have immediate buy-in if he's not already talked about
Mhm.
implementing that. Now, the involvement of his staff, his various secretaries, um, the fact that he's going to have to put all that together and it's got to take place in less than 3 months, uh, make all that was going to be challenging. And it's going to be challenging for anybody moving in from a non-government position into the government. So it's going to take uh, a ton of people with a lot of intelligence to make that take place that quickly and move it. So how fast is he going to be able to create the plan, implement the plan is what, I'm there with him to see whether that will happen. I'm certainly not the person that would tell him how to make things. He's got tons of people around him who share ideology,
Mhm.
but in his heart, I believe he's an individual who, if anybody can make a difference, that he will. You got to remember that some of the things that we haven't talked about, and one of the most important things that we haven't talked about, is the economics of it all. Because we all get educated. Uh, we don't
Mhm.
necessarily get educated to go to a job. We get educated to become part of a vital system in which we can compete and become wealthy business people by being involved. So that opportunity I haven't seen in the state of Maryland. That's bad. I mean, when I started in this journey in business, uh, which was back in the 80s in business. I first opened my first company up in 1981
Mhm.
in business, engineering, architectural, construction management firm. Um, didn't have it. Had more success in Washington D.C. under Marion Barry's administration I've ever had in the state of Maryland. Period. I've fought large companies to get other individuals involved, and that's why I moved over to the nonprofit Prince George County Contractors Association, Maryland Business Clergy Partners, to fight for people who didn't have the ability to fight or who were too afraid to fight.
Mhm.
And they are there, seriously there. And when you ask them to step out, they get so afraid as business people to come out to fight for themselves because they could be blackballed in the process.
Mhm.
They continue to let a system just chew away from them, and eventually they spend a lifetime trying to compete for something that never takes place. I find that a very poor
Mhm.
uh, torch to pass on to the youth, and so it's a continuation of what I'm looking at from the top down. If we don't get dynamic leadership or give a chance for a young person to step in to get a chance to make those changes, it's not going to happen, because what takes place is that the big boys in the game really don't want a Richard or another young person to really move forward. They want to use you to benefit themselves, and that's capitalism quite often. So if I can use you to get where I need to go, then I'll create something for you. And I'll give you prime examples of that with leadership people who've been in leadership positions in Prince George County, who are sidelined now looking for a job and begging to get back in. Where's Shirley Sharon Baker in the process? Where's Jack Johnson in the process? We all knew where Wayne Curry was after you spent all these years being leader and the county exec, and then after you're through with, done with, you chewed up in the system. Where are you? You're certainly not a major Fortune 500 business. You didn't get there. You're not even a business. Don't even have the business that you can actually go out and make a living out of. So, to me, it really comes down to that soul searching component. Is that unless we do that, and I would say that this started in 1964 when this affirmative action program was meant to move and put in place, Richard, which for you, it's like, okay, I hear you, but that's history. And that was me when I looked at the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. Really, okay, I understood a movement, but I really don't get a buy-in to the old movement. I don't get that. But it's a measuring point. It's a measuring point of what we should have. And for us now to realize that if we're going to get better in this, doing the damage, I'm going to have to step up. I'm going to have to play a very strong role. I'm tired, but I'm going to have to keep going. People saying, well, why are you out there doing this? I really don't have to be an advocate for business people anymore. Not at all. I don't have to make people angry with me at all because I'm challenging and I'm talking about people. But until we have what I call a yeast, and a yeast is just to activate, to create that nice roll that comes when you put it in a rise and it turns out with a nice product. We don't have anything. Now, that's what the Black community has been missing. And so when you get into political leadership and you take that political leadership and you misuse it for a reason for you to set up vehicles to benefit you versus set up vehicles to benefit the community, you are deceptive and you're wrong, and you set the Black folk back for years. And I've seen that happen. I see it happening today. And then, but I also see, I'm a very spiritual person. I also see that at this moment that there is an outside influence that has removed a lot of the barriers that were in place before. And now, if we're willing to put the energy in the time, I believe this is the first time that we have a path. I'm not saying that's because of Westmore being in place. He's only a part of a component. Because as you said, Richard, and I do believe what you said, I agree with you 100%. Biden has done better than Obama. And I will justify that by saying Obama was never in a position as a Black man to get any of those things where Biden was. But he did it. He did it. And did the things that benefited you. What Obama did the things that benefit major corporations when he bailed out all of the auto companies. Now, it didn't help me at the end of the day. I didn't get a car out of it. But those guys got tons of money and they stayed in business. Did they help me or you? No, they did not. When the housing industry failed and he came in and he bailed out the mortgage companies, did the Black folk get bailed out? No, they did not. We were still stuck with those mortgages, bad mortgages that I just recently got rid of 3 years ago. But yes, it's a different way, a different capacity of delivery that different people have. Sometimes it's better to have a white individual to be in a position to help you than it is to have an African American position. But this time, I see we are probably on the right path. And I do say that we have my strong feelings that we have the right person, but we're going to have to help him to get there. You, Richard Elliott's, have to stand up. Get your rest, but be ready. Don't disappear and be back out there because your voice is needed out. Your brain is needed out here in this movement. And you're not the kind of person you put all of your energy. You're like Lisa when she does something, and she puts her energy into Peter. And I'm saying, Peter, look, he ain't gonna do that. He ain't gonna do it. I found out he's not gonna do it. It's like I found the magic, rub the magic thing, and I see this picture that says, "Hey, look, this guy's just totally bullshitting us." Mm-hmm. And I walk away and I tell her, she says, no. I just, come on. But I say that this is the time for us now as a group of Black people. Okay. What, in order for us to do that, you still got to get him in there. But mm-hmm. Then we have to hold him accountable. You put together very good machinery as young individuals. You guys did a tremendous job in Prince George's County of being out there, being activists. You put a entire county council in place that tripped up the sitting individuals who were in those seats who were trying to take power away from the council, and they haven't even been sworn in. But what they were trying to pull off in the county, they stopped it. They stopped it. You see the power of the fact that you just have by just setting your ideology in motion, that you're the next person, you're coming up, and we're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. It's unbelievable what you can. Now you sit in those seats and you make a difference, and you stop those large white developers from stepping into your community and stealing from your communities. Mm-hmm. Over and over again. And you help some Black company and some business person to make a difference in those communities, because who are they going to help? They better be helping the African American individuals. They better be, because that's since 64 doing affirmative action. There's onslaught of that. I think the best numbers we ever got in the state of Maryland is 2% a goal being met by African American people, and that's in a program that's a set aside program. It's supposed to be an MBE program. So that's where we really need to be focused on. And yes, I do think we have the best person, and I'm going to be there. I'm going to make sure that until people stop me from coming into a room and talking, I'm going to be there, and Wes's administration, I'm going to be in his ear.
Okay. So, all right. So today we talked about how impactful and how important young vote is to this election and all the different elections, especially the governor's election. And from Mr. Gaskins, we did learn that the candidate Wes Moore for governor is receptive and looking forward to working with young individuals, young voters, young individuals to make change. The question I have for the panel is, how do we do that? I mean, how does he do that? I mean, right now, Richard said they're tired. He's tired. A lot of them are tired. They have put out all their energy to other campaign candidates that were actually running, and they lost. And as a result of that, how are we going to pull them back to either the Wes Moore or the Dan Cox? Something that Mike said, that Dan Cox is going to come back refreshed with millions of dollars. And he may look at this and say, aha, I need to get to the young Black voters. How will Wes Moore counteract that? How will he be able to counteract that? What suggestions would we be able to offer him as that candidate to counteract that? Because now he's going to have more money to manipulate.
Well, you know, Now,
Well,
let me say
Westmore
this.
said that he was going to every HBCU in the next few weeks, right? The upcoming weeks, if that's where he feels the vote is. And, what Dan Cox acquiesces to in terms of what his messaging is. I don't know what he said at Morgan. I heard they gave him they grilled him pretty hard, as they should. But, I think that West has to get the vote out, and he needs some substance. He needs some chicken boxes, that people can look at. That's what we call it in Baltimore.
Yeah, sure.
Baltimore candidates, and you know what I mean. It's just a correlation between intangible stuff and chicken boxes. In Baltimore, you give out chicken boxes, people go to the polls.
Yeah.
And so, what is Westmore's proverbial chicken box? And how is he speaking with or to the people now? What are the platforms he's using to get to the people now? Because you all said young people, but you didn't identify young as Black. You just said young, right? So what do you?
Well, I'm talking about African. This is a Black.
Is that what that says?
So it's Black young.
I thought Mr.
Black
Gaskins
young
said.
Voters.
I thought Mr. Gaskins said something about the mixed demographics and the need to, whatever. And then he also said that everybody Black doesn't get us what we need. So what do we want? Black people, or do we want young people or young Black people?
Michael, what I agree with you 100%. That's what I said, is that because even if you got all of the Black voters to vote for West, he wouldn't be governor. And if all of the white voters voted for Cox. So let's be real. This race is much like the Obama race. It's got to be won across the board now. We might need 99.9% of the African American vote. Let me be real. We might need about 93, 94%.
Yeah, all of them have to vote for West.
Yes, and then we might need, on the other side, we might need the liberal, a white female who've been
suburban, the suburban
attacked,
white female, the suburban
absolutely,
white
who've been attacked by that Supreme Court decision. We need we need them, and they need to be fired up, and they need to be there, and then we need the liberal white person there, who, much like Hogan, who said, I'm not going to endorse this guy because I can't stand him. He's not a good guy. We need all those individuals to be accurate and true and to show up. Now, if any of those groups decide that, okay, and those numbers have to be around 38% turnout, but you drop those numbers and they end up being 20 or 25, and Cox gives out enough chicken boxes, look, those numbers could change drastically.
That's what they did in the primary. Look at how he did in the primary. People were surprised. I wasn't surprised, but the closet voters, the closet trumpeters pushed him. I mean, he kicked Kelly Schultz's butt.
Yes.
Because of the closet factor, tore her up, man. We don't know what they'll do when, like you said earlier, Joe, when they go behind that curtain, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Their fingers are sweating. They said, man, I just can't vote for this Black man.
Yep. That's right.
Yeah.
Too late to change it after you made that decision, right?
Yeah,
maybe I should have voted for him, but hey.
$50.
Absolutely. And I know, and that's absolutely correct. And one thing that Richard said when he came on was this about what what West needs to do is to give more jobs to the young Black individuals on the campaign. I agree with him 100%. The only thing I say about that is that right now they probably should have been done early, right after, and that should have been the plan to start to bring them in. But at the worst case scenario, he needs to be able to bring them in to early election, generate them, get them in there, have whatever it takes to get, if it's money they need, and individuals need money, pay them to be there. I mean, everybody else does it across the board. That's what you got to do in order to do that. You got to show them, and then you have to involve your individuals who ran for election in a leadership position to help to organize them,
There you go.
to bring them there. And that's what
Absolutely
needs to
agree.
be done in order for you to generate and put that grassroots in place to win this one.
I absolutely agree.
All right. So, Mr. Elliott, if Westmore came to you and said, "Hey, Mr. Elliott, I need you for my campaign," are you willing to step up?
Yeah, but I agree with what Joe just said, and in fact, that was more or less the game plan. I'm the communications director for the Prince George's Young Democrats, and we've already started making our sort of budget for election day and for early vote. As much as I would love to tell somebody, hey, stand outside and direct people to go vote and do all that, and not only not be paid to do it, but take time off from work to do it. That's not known to work. So, I mean, just simply if there's several young people organizations, Prince George's Young Dems, Howard, Montgomery, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Charles all have Young Dems chapters. There are youth NAACP chapters in Prince George's at the minimum. Through all these different organizations, I'm not saying that West needs to have a one-on-one conversation with every person hypothetically being brought on. But yes, if there's in my political math, if you give me a job, you get my vote plus you get my grandparents' vote off rip. If you hire me, you get at least 3 votes off of that. And that's pretty much the only thing I've seen that works, at like a 90% effectiveness rate in politics. Whether it be people covering the polls, whether it be people sign waving, people going out and putting up posters. Politics now, with how accessible it can be and how easy it is to pay people and how many people need stuff to do. And just simply put, like everybody's been saying in this, and I agree with the most, we need maximum voter engagement for, if no other reason, to see what the next elections are going to look like. That's about the only way to do it. Right now, every campaign's pretty much focusing on mail and television, which we could have a whole other conversation about kind of the economics of campaigns, where once upon a time you pay a whole bunch of field workers and maybe do a commercial. And now field is maybe the least important component of a campaign from both a financial investment perspective and from a return on investment perspective. Whereas television, which gives no black people money, is one of the most invested in. I'm not critiquing Wes on that in particular. That's just a general, just nationwide trend. But getting to the bottom of that one, and if you want grassroots expenditures, you have to pay for field and event stuff. And if you're going to do that, that is just simply less money that you have for fundraising. That's less money you have for TV. That's less money you have for mailers. Is it worth that investment on the votes that you might lose now because young people don't vote in the primary versus the votes you might get in the future because you need young people's votes in the general? And that's what I think is the biggest chasm. There are lots, and I did voter registration at UMBC when I was there, and even among college kids, about 7 or 8 out of 10 registered as independents. Why the hell they did that, I have no clue. I legally was not allowed to ask. But when you register as independent in Maryland, you're saying not only is my opinion not matter, you should avoid me. Almost, you're saying that. When young people cannot participate in the primaries and then either don't find out they can't participate in the generals because most of the down ballots determine, or don't find out until the general is happening that there was a primary, that leads to an even bigger chasm. And that's probably the one to be addressed in the future, whether we have same day party registration changes, which a lot of white Democrats are strongly against for some bizarre reason, or we otherwise change the kind of procedures of the election. As long as we have so many people who are registered independents, who are in theory young, politically engaged black folk, that's going to need a major change. And that's also one of the reasons why for a lot of these younger people who've been elected, they've won in like nonpartisan races. Martin Mitchell in Laurel, that was a nonpartisan race. Tim's not a young person, but in Bowie, where Tim was the first black mayor, nonpartisan election system. In a lot of the nonpartisan election systems, because you can just kind of say anybody, hey, do you plan to vote? Okay, here's a person, you've met them. that makes it actually more accessible for young people, even though it adds Republican voters, that's one that I think we really need to focus on as a state, to either change it so independents can re-register or just have open primaries.
Open primaries. What would that look like?
So let's say in California, I'm not calling them the jungle primary. I hate that name, but in California, let's say you want to vote for governor. Doesn't matter what you're registered as. You go and there's like 23 names on a sheet, and you just pick one. It doesn't matter if they're Democrat or Republican, a union party, a unaffiliated and independent, blah blah blah. That would be the fully open primary process. But even for Maryland, I'd be fine with just, it doesn't matter your party. You can go to the polls. You can change your party on election day and participate in the election of your choosing. And we've had these in my lifetime. In the year 2000, Republicans had an open primary for president.
Okay, that's something to think about. Open primary. Open. So if we had an open primary, would we have an open general election?
We have an open general election. In fact, we have one of the more open general elections, because a lot of people falsely state their opinions in the polls. Another thing I agree with that everybody said in this polls, even though Wes is up by 20, Wes is up by maybe 11, and there's 9 racist people who want to feel a little bit less racist.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did cross over with Hogan. I did vote for Hogan twice. Because I didn't like the opponent. I did not believe in anything that Democrat had said, and unfortunately, I was able to say I can stand by my vote. But I didn't want O'Malley in another year. I didn't want him. I didn't trust him. So as a voter, if I was a youth, how would you guide me to support this election? I'm going to ask each one of you to tell me that. If I'm a youth, I'm saying, look, I'm tired of the local, I'm tired of the state, I'm tired of the federal, and you want me to vote for governor. Okay, I want my student loans forgiven. I want affordable housing that I don't have to deal with slumlords with rat-infested homes, or someone who can jack up my rent just because he has that amendment in Baltimore City that he can. Why am I voting for what's going to make my life change if I vote? So this is a youth asking each one of you.
Hey, can I start?
Sure.
Easy for just participating in this one, the marijuana ballot question. Easily, that's the biggest draw. The marijuana ballot question is going to pass with, I think, about 2/3 of the vote. For young people, whether they consume cannabis or not, they know young people who do, and you could just simply say, do you think your friends should be getting large fines, prison sentences? Should the marijuana industry continue as a stupid racist monopoly where it's like all Hogan sheriffs that have the licenses? From a lot of perspectives, whether you're a consumer, a friend of consumers, a business owner, or just a person that wants like the money in the state spent better. Like our state is more racist than Mississippi on young black male incarceration.
Yes,
actually, let me not. Sorry, the state has worse disparities than Mississippi. Let's not call Maryland more racist than Mississippi, but Maryland has worse disparities than Mississippi on young black male incarceration. A lot of the people who, in theory, would be voters who I could reach out to are literally not here. Like they've been priced out of the state, or they're in jail, or they're in prison, or even worse, they're back from prison and jail and don't know they can vote.
Yes.
That's a whole nother topic of conversation. But the marijuana ballot question is by far the biggest draw for getting people to participate. There are people on the street, and I was in Cherry Hill in 2020, and there were people who were like, I don't care about voting, screw all these people. And I told them there's a ballot question about like how the city collects money, and they voted on that, but didn't vote in the local election. So if they participate the once, it's more likely they'll return. for regarding the more substantive stuff, and this one goes more like what Joe and Lisa could answer, it'd be very hard to transmit to a regular person. A lot of that gets into who Wes is picking for his like administration people. I'm not saying y'all know. We don't have to have that conversation right now because I know that's what everybody wants to know. But if Wes is able to commit, like as climate activists were able to do with Joe Biden, get a better person for Secretary of of Interior, for example. I think it was in part due to climate activists we have our first ever Native American department secretary. So if Wes were able to commit, not just along racial lines, but like, hey, my Secretary of the Environment will have experience like as a scientist or having reduced climate emissions. Secretary of Housing be a person who formerly worked in the law to protect tenants. If those kind of things, like, I'm not saying a person, but just kind of my administrator will have these qualifications, so I know how it fits in with my life. Shit, if you say you have a Secretary of Education that has as much student loans as me, that means at least a little bit to me.
Yeah.
But that's also above the level of what the average voter would know. It's just something I could transmit to voters to say, hey, person will choose this person. It could result in these changes.
Okay. All right, Lisa.
I agree so much. And as an advocate for marijuana, you're doing the research, that that's a topic that unites 3 generations that are controlling politics right now. And to be able to market directly to it is to take the Richard Elliots and individuals with social media and directly go to where they are and make it relatable. That was the formula that Obama used. That is the formula that Joe Biden is using right now with the student loan issue. Until we begin to really look at placing individuals for the minority business enterprise secretary, for instance, that actually can connect to businesses and how to move that discrimination mark to the next plateau. These are the things that interest them. So if we're going to energize the base, meaning young people in particular, we have to get out there, market directly to them with things that really matters. Marijuana.
Okay. And that's it?
Richard said a mouthful, then I really am.
All right, so marijuana. Okay.
That.
All right. I don't smoke it, but if I was a youth, and that was important.
When we look at $1 billion industry and having the 3rd highest arrest rate in the country for our Black men, when we look at the disparities that literally us as a culture of people have done, then I cannot just dismiss that that's one relevant unifier at the table that could actually shift me as a business owner, us as a culture of people, and looking at reparations, but also dealing with the injustice for prison, on participation at every level. The fact that it is an alternative medicine that we have not really talked about it at that level, and now we're looking at it in recreation. My interest in medical is because there's a medicinal benefit that we are literally still downplaying, and it is sad. The Vice President of the United States has spoke on it. Cory Booker has spoke on it. I mean, you have so much to be said about it. Doctors that are saying that they cannot begin to discuss it in terms of how to administer and the actual benefits because it's illegal at the federal level. So if we can begin to have this conversation, real conversation about inclusion of us, Black women, Black individuals. I'm an advocate for us. So speaking about other cultures, we have to look at the state, but for us as Black people, we have suffered the greatest at the table for any forms of marijuana. So it's going to be for me to look at that's a unifier conversation that young people can identify with. That older people know because their children and themselves have been locked up, stopped, pulled over for any incidence of marijuana. So marketing that, having that conversation, to me, would be one of the leading conversations that would drive them to the poll because they can identify with it on many different levels.
Okay. Mike.
Hey, you're an urban farmer, right, Quandra?
Yes, I am. And you know what? I am even thinking about I want to be a grower.
You want to be
Right.
what?
I want to be a grower.
Wait, are
Yeah,
you
so
are you
maybe
in West Baltimore?
Why don't you go ahead and grow about 10 acres of reefer and stay in the corners in
I
Sandtown,
haven't
right?
heard it referred to as reefer in a
Because
long
that's
time.
what it is. It's reefer. It turned to marijuana when you all now all of a sudden, here we are selling out again, love you to
Right.
death, selling out again, right? Using a bad bill of goods on our community when we haven't even taken ownership of the process to sell. And now Richard is saying, unleash all the millions of people that want to smoke, and then you got to go buy it where?
To the
In the
dispensary.
process that we said that we don't control, right?
Right.
And marijuana is a gateway drug. I don't care what anyone says, right? So if I like it well enough, then give me some cocaine, right? That's how we used to do it when I was coming up. And it's okay. But then the kids on the corner in Sandtown and down there by Ebony Inn, and I can go on and on over by Southern Avenue that was selling the nickel bag and the dime bag when it became legal, got pushed out of the process.
Right.
And then when they picked up a squeegee, now we locking them up for squeegeing windshields with fluids because they're knocked out of the marijuana game. And then you all want to go ahead and legalize it with no leverage of what it means to our community, because if Quandra try to grow it now, you're gonna lock her up, right? So let's get real about what's important. So all of a sudden, this sleepy drug, you're gonna entice our black people, our young people. Hey, Richard said, let's go vote for the marijuana legislation, y'all. You know what I'm saying? We're gonna go vote for that. And then what do we get out of that at the end?
Wait,
what do we get?
Wait, Mike, to your point, there was legislation this very year, literally reparations legislation introduced by Senator Carter. I'm pretty sure myself, Lisa, and Joe all supported it because it would have not only saved us money, not only would have reduced prison incarceration, not only would have created a bunch of job opportunities, but would have earmarked it specifically for the areas that had the most arrests in the past 30 years.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Jill Carter's legislation in that regard.
But the Democrats killed it.
I am so disappointed, and that's why to put my
you muted yourself
and learn to take my turn, because Reefer Madness. Remember that movie? So all of a sudden, I'm saying, Richard says, hey, let's trick the young brothers and sisters, get them to the ballot by telling them that Reefer Madness is on the ballot as a referendum. If they all go and vote for it, we'll pass it. And at the end of the day, what kind of strategy is that for us as a people?
I think you need more education on marijuana, though, on Michael.
Hey, Mike, I'm just telling you what works. I'm just saying what works.
It's a lot of research out there.
Lisa, what I'm saying, because it's they asked me the question, I'm saying there's a business aspect of it that should be in place before we say and encourage our people to support a referendum that just further puts money in the process in place that we don't have any ownership in.
Now, I'm not disagreeing, but I think what Richard is saying is to have the conversation about it, period. A lot of our young folks don't know or understand the politics behind it. They're looking at it from a get high perspective.
Okay, then let's educate them, Lisa, first before we use our voting power to support something, and then we have no real leverage because they're already in the game.
Okay.
We're ass backwards in our strategy. Ain't nobody smoked no more reefer than me. That's why I didn't smoke in 36 years.
No,
marijuana has come
it's
a
a
long way since probably you have smoked it, because literally you're in a vacuum.
So I should get a gummy? What are you saying?
Joe, he needs some of my tea. He needs to have a cup of my tea.
Yeah. Did try that. But look,
in all sincerity, Michael, I don't disagree. The economic component is my biggest argument, that we're not at the table, that we were sold legislation that promised that we would be at the table. We've taken them to court to try to enforce to force ourselves at the table, and we're still not there, and yet we're looking at recreation. So I agree with slow down the process, but it not taking it to the people and letting the conversation be understood is a greater tragedy to me than actually not having it on not even having the opportunity to.
I'm a businessman. I know it's Joe. I respectfully disagree with you, Lisa. I think that the only time that you have leverage is when you don't take it to the people, because once it's passed, we have no leverage to allow them to make them bring us into the game, because now all their customers are supporting it. Now it's recreational. I just have a problem with our strategy.
Mike, one more thing to add, and this is kind of going on a bill I was talking about with our friend Martin Mitchell earlier. This year, there's going to be a bill about hospice usage and general patient access to cannabis in the hospital. And I thought, what could we possibly do to make this a positive bill for Black folks? Two different things, or actually three different like little pieces of bills that could help. There is now a bill for urban agriculture. There's now urban agriculture grants. And the federal government does not think that you should be able to grow marijuana with federal government money, but I don't think the state government holds that distinction. Within this hospice bill, I told Martin Mitchell, if you have a senator that proposes it from an urban area, ask them to include grants to grow and additional grow licenses within that, something that would not have been possible 2 years ago. There's also Project Open Spaces money that's now going to be going into Charles County that before did not exist. You could, in theory, apply some of this Project Open Spaces money, I think, also for a grow operation. And then finally, this might even be the master stroke. They're trying to create a soil conservation district in Baltimore City. There currently isn't one. What soil conservation district mean? You get money from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which you could use for whatever. Now, again, the U.S. Department of Agriculture says you can't grow weed with their money, but do they say you can't improve soil quality? Do they say that you can't start to, buy infrastructure, whether it be buy pipes, blah, blah, blah? This is just different ways of getting money into a place. Quandra just said that she wants to be a grower.
Yeah.
Under this hypothetical, under this bill I'm talking about with Martin Mitchell, which in theory would be proposed for Baltimore, I would love for there to be earmarked grow licenses and money for growing for West Baltimore. You said you have to have leverage. You can add leverage within the bill. And this is even separate from the cannabis referendum bill.
All right, Joe.
Well, I guess you guys have done it. I mean,
Mike must be praying.
No, this is very, very good. And I won't even tell you that I'm a chairman of the African American Cannabis Association, because Michael will kill me. But my spin on this is, anyway, all that stuff that you're talking about, Michael, they're doing it anyway, regardless, and they're spending the money in these the ones that are not buying it, still buying it in the gray areas, are buying it at again, I don't know the number that we have in terms of dispensaries, but I know it's so low. It's less than 5, maybe 2 or 3.
And they're way too expensive for, I'll just call your average consumer. Myself being, representative of average consumer.
Yes. Well, because they're medical cannabis facilities, and the oversight that has to go into those when you're doing it's ridiculous. So we tried with the kind of money that we spent in there, over $250,000. Others spent $600,000 just to get in to be competitive. Because at the end of the day, when it becomes recreational, becomes legal, then the big guys are going to control. But I will say this: I do know this, that with a relative of mine who was addicted to opioids, the only thing that he used to get him off of the opioid addiction was to go to marijuana to go backwards, to step back off of it. And he had been addicted for, I mean, he was right at the edge. He was right at the edge. So I do know the benefits of it. I do know benefits. But you asked this question, I think this is the question before we got on the cannabis or the reefer, which I used back during
I haven't heard reefer in a long time, Michael. You gotta say bud. You gotta say bud. Even flower. I'm gonna help you out.
But my thing is, if we don't, this is the thing I saw this morning when I went down to St. Mary's and we were out there putting up signs from Dan Cox. This is my fear factor. Trump is such a brilliant in terms of controlling the minds of candidates. Is that if somehow Cox became the governor, it wouldn't be Cox who would be the governor. It would be Trump that would be controlling the state of Maryland. Okay. That's my biggest fear factor with this guy, Dan Cox. I don't know him, but I just saw the sign down there earlier, less than 8 hours ago, that said endorsed by Trump. And as you said, he's going to go down to Trump's place and he's going to pick up some money. And everybody who gets in there, guess what? When they drink the Kool-Aid, they become crazy advocates for Donald Trump. And I'm certainly not a Donald Trump fan. So that alone tells me that even if my option were open for Cox before he told me and you told me he was going there, I would tell every person in the state of Maryland that do not support this candidate for governor. If I'm going to sell you there, and look, there are people out there who will tell me, hey, I don't see nothing wrong because I think Trump is a great guy. And they are black folk that I'm talking about. They're young, they're old, and they will tell you that. But it would be a disaster for us to end up being a state, another, I wouldn't call it another red state, another Trump state. With that, I conclude.
Okay, so with all these grants, Richard, I need those grants so I can take a look and see how I can be a grower.
Joe, we're about to talk after this call.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's good. Let's do
all
that.
All right. So
you got my number. Oh, I got yours.
I'll text Lisa right now.
There you go.
But you're on the text, and everybody's number is on that text.
Okay, got you.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So, okay, Mr. Haney, we're gonna let you because it looks like you're. Are you breathing? I mean,
hey, yeah, I'm breathing.
This
is a good discussion. Very good discussion, and I appreciate the discussion and really getting to know Mr. Gaskins and Lisa, Richard. You know, we had time to really get to know each other as well. This Sunday on 60 Minutes in Black America, we're going to be talking about the prison system and the exoneration of one in particular, Alonzo Trey Jones III, who served 37 years, just got out in July after being incarcerated wrongly. So the Project Innocence, the Georgetown University project, and the attorneys are going to be on as well. And we're going to talk about, wrongly convicted Black people, men and women, that served decades in prison in this state of Maryland and across the country. So really, really looking forward to that conversation. And Mr. Gaskins working with the Westmore people to get him scheduled so he can come on behind Dan Cox. Dan Cox had thousands of viewers on the show, man. It was intriguing. It was unreal. If you haven't looked at it, go take a look at it. They're begging to come back, but in fairness, I'm not going to let them come back until Wes gets his opportunity. So,
great. Okay.
Carter Elliott and Tisha Edwards, all these guys. Hopefully, we can work this out real soon.
Great.
Okay. On that note, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming in and being a panelist. Please like and share. We do like to, I would love to hear your viewpoints. If you would like to become a guest or a panelist on the show, you can give me a call at 443-355-1892, or you can shoot me an email at Quandra, QUANDRA.gaines gaines@gmail.com. So I look forward to seeing some of you as panelists next week, or where we're going to be talking about some other things. But one of the things is that I'm actually going to be working with Mr. Blackshear. We're going to do countdown to the elections where East Coast meets West Coast, and we're going to join in collaboration to make that happen. So I will be inviting you back for that as well. On that note, thank you and have a great evening.
I'm going to get me a joint. Just kidding. Just kidding.
Hey,
Michael,
me too, Mike.
Michael, you need to stop messing with those that sleepy weed. There's some weed out here that don't make you sleep, Michael.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna get me a chicken box. No, I'm gonna get me a joint first, then a chicken box. I'm gonna get the munchies, right? And get some
and then you're gonna go vote.
Yes.
Go throw some seeds in Quandra's backyard, so all of a sudden it multiply. Then we can go over there and pick it.
There you go. Good night. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Oh my God.